Hello guys, welcome back to our another episode of Group Interviews. This is Starlight here, and today I'm so delighted to have Ogi, the NFT artist, come to our podcast. Please welcome Ogi.
Hi, hello.
The Globe mobile app is now live on the Apple App Store. Trade anytime, anywhere, with any asset as collateral. Stay connected with all your positions on the go. Globe, exchange everything, now even easier.
Okay, so first questions, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what made you interested in the blockchain industry?
Sure, yeah, definitely. So my name is Ogi. I run in the digital realm as Ogi Worlds. So you can find me a lot on Twitter, and you can just Google it, it'll pop up. But yeah, so I'm an artist, a VR animator, a designer, a motion graphic designer, and a metaverse builders creator. So that's kind of like what I actually do, but it's all really art, digital art, as kind of my little kind of tagline goes, with a power of VR and the way of animation. That's basically what it's all about. I started like in the NFT space February the 21 Twitter, but I was aware of it for a lot longer. Like most people, I kind of got interested through other people, and I think it's a beautiful thing about the whole blockchain technology. It, as much as it's digital, it's the digital word of mouth, effectively. So you'll find something out, get interested, fall down a rabbit hole, talk to some people, find out more, and then off you go. And for me, because I was a relatively early-ish VR adopter, so I was working on virtual reality pipelines for animation and motion graphics and how can incorporate them. So I met this gentleman who did a talk with TEDx a while ago, who later became a guy called Metageist in the space. So he's like effectively an OG. He joined like fairly early-ish, early 19. So he was starting to, I was kind of paying attention to what he was doing, because we did a head-to-head in a tilt brush world tournament in February of 2020, just before the pandemic kind of locked down everything. So he was, after that, kind of threw himself straight into the whole blockchain thing and did a full-on degen from, like, creating works, minting on Nifty, doing I think one of the earliest collections that I've seen, with there were like character collections and stuff like that. And it was really interesting what he was doing. He was kind of playing around and finding an outlet for his more artistic side of his kind of art practice. And for many of us artists, we have, like, especially digital artists, we have this kind of commercial side that we're kind of trying to maintain, so we can basically make enough to kind of buy expensive equipment and continue doing what we do, whether we work for as a freelance or the studio or with other people and stuff like that, whether it's anything from concept and onwards. But most of us have this kind of other side that we do a lot of experimentation, a lot of evening, weekend, private projects, personal works and stuff like that we only up to the blockchain kind of tech and NFTs, we were just putting them up as kind of, little pretty pictures and animations on Instagram or other kind of social platforms. So it's very limited of what you can actually achieve. And I was looking at what he was doing, and I found it very, very interesting, and thinking like, yeah, I want to have a crack at this. And I had like a whole vault of experiments, which are, kind of a weekend experiments. Like, wouldn't be interesting if I like take this and see where it's going to go. So yeah, I thought like that'd be a really good thing to do. So that was my kind of like in, effectively. So because I met him in real life as well. I kind of chatted to Metageist, and he was kind of telling me how he was doing stuff, and I had this large project that I was working on, which was effectively a short film, which became Chorismos.
Wow.
And it was, I think, it was 8 minutes plus. It was full 4K, cinematic 4K, so 4096 times 2016 pixels, with a full-on soundtrack by Russian Linesman, who does a lot of like techno music over in UK. He's like frequently on BBC Two. Like he drops little things there for just under a decade. So yeah, like it was this big project, and we weren't really sure where to put it and how to get it out. And I was thinking like, should I do a smaller project? Should I cut it up? Should I continue working this big thing? I really got into the project and I found this new way of working, which resulted in the style that the project is named under, like the Chorismos style, which is exploration between form and concept. So it means that if people go and check my work, they'll see what I mean, because it's easier to see it than for me to explain it. But basically, in short, it's all the meshes are hand drawn and they're all moving in unison, creating these little blocks that I take and then use them to assemble into these larger kind of bodies of work, and then use those to kind of further assemble into kind of animations, basically storytelling animations with narrative and world building and everything else. And they're very visceral and full of verisimilitude and believability within the world. So this project, we were wondering how to do it because it was 8 minutes. And in the end, we were really fortunate that a platform was just starting up, First Dibs, and their background, they just turned into IPO, and they were selling goods digitally for 20 years. Things like Louis Vuitton wardrobes, original Picassos and stuff like that. So they were like, an eBay for art and high-end collectibles, and they just started doing NFTs. And they had like up to gigabyte size. So that was like, oh, cool. I can actually mint the whole thing as one thing, as opposed to having to cut it up or do it as unlockable or anything else in the space. So so my kind of genesis was a 1 gigabyte, 0.8 of a full gigabyte, 8 minute plus 4K monster piece, which kind of went out. And I think at the time it was the largest NFT. I mean, probably, you never know. It's hard to say that it was the largest, but it was, I haven't seen anything bigger at the time. So, I mean, there's been huge stuff since then. But yeah, there was amazing kind of experience of just putting it out there and moving into the kind of fine art world with it. And I was fortunate enough that it sold really quickly for a really good price, which meant that I could dive into the space pretty much full time. And then kind of instead of doing experimentations in the evenings and weekends and playing around with art, I could make art full time and do part-time client work, kind of just to supplement the income a little bit, and also kind of just to, because I have some nice clients, just to keep them like sweet for the time being, because so it's been a wonderful adventure since. That was kind of like the way I kind of got in. Could be a little bit different than most people, but like everyone else, like it's a bunch of small things and rabbit holes and chipping away. For example, like a year before that, I had a client who was doing tags for high-end fashion, which is blockchain tags. So they did a series of these motion graphics videos for them. So kind of I got to understand what later became the NFT technology, because they were like doing that. So it was kind of weird. It always feels like many roads were leading up to this. And it was just the expression of the whole VR experimentation and pipelines and the blockchain technology ripening up, and having enough time to kind of create it through the misfortune of the pandemic, like everyone did. Suddenly we all have a bit more time than we thought we had. And it kind of worked out a bit for me. So that's kind of like my entry road to the Genesis and to the NFT and blockchain space. And obviously once you get in there, like everyone else, you start having a lot of fun, meeting a lot of super interesting people across the board, like other kind of artists, creatives, the people in kind of obviously it's like maligned a bit now, like, but DeFi was really exciting at the time. There was a lot of cool, exciting use of technology, Metaverse things, which for me, from VR kind of background, was like super interesting. And you kind of like just seeing all of these things kind of come together. So it's a wonderful thing. And also like, having a kind of international community of people who are all very open to new experiences when it comes to creativity, very open about new technology, kind of super interested about kind of communicating about it, looking at new ways we can improve ourselves and the world around us. It was super kind of cool to be a part of that community. And I think that's one of the kind of bigger things. I mean, we talk about like smaller communities in the NFT space, but that overall large community, that's kind of quite special, because in a way it's like self-selective. If you're open to new experiences and new things, you'll gravitate towards these things. So we're all kind of fairly similar in a way. But the fact that we can have like global digital communication means that we can all kind of talk. When you go to like animation festivals, it's a bunch of animators, motion graphic festivals, a bunch of motion graphic people. If you go to like branding, design, a bunch of marketers, it's everything's quite segregated effectively. And not many people talk about what they're doing creatively, how they're running this stuff in the back of their kind of technology and everything else, how they're actually charging for it, because it's all open here with the blockchain. So everyone knows how much everyone's earning. And that's also a big thing, so yeah, in many ways, it felt like revolutionary. And I think it still is.
So as an experienced motion graphic designer, an animator, and a VR artist who work in the animation industry, which do you enjoy the most and why? You have to choose one.
Well, I think I'm Ogi, and I'm definitely more of an Ogi worlds rather than a studio world kind of thing. I, like many people, I had to differentiate between two, because I ran as a solopreneur effectively. So I ran as a studio which would have done like anything from mostly motion graphic design, but also branding, font creation, illustration, GIF making, vector art, a large kind of stuff. At the early days, I was doing murals on the walls, kind of building up shops from the outside, literally, physically. So I've been doing this for a while. Ogi Worlds is definitely where my heart, mind, and soul is. I've been kind of trying since I was 4 to make an animation which will interest me enough to make another one, to make like long form, what is called long form here, short films, short things. And like many other animators, we kind of try a project, it takes so long to get it over the board, and we kind of lose our interest, or a lot of times you get better, and then when you're getting to like the middle of a project, you kind of I need to redo everything because I'm so much better at doing it now. So yeah, like being able to do the digital mythology that I'm creating, it feels like an unbelievable gift to explore this element of art, to explore this world which kind of started to reveal itself to me through the work. Yeah, it's I think that's something that's going to last quite a long time. So yeah, definitely Ogi Worlds. It's where it's all about, and other things that kind of started to connect from it, and opportunities coming out from that work. Because just in the last 2 years, skill-wise, I've scaled so much. What I usually would spend maybe 7 years or even a decade, I've managed to achieve that in a very short time. And for example, last year, I've got almost 20 minutes of animation, which is, when you say that to someone in animation history, it's like, whoa, that's crazy numbers. And it's not it's super simple. It's highly complex CG 4K with thousands and thousands of polys moving around in unison. The recent project was 1.2 trillion polys just in that. So yeah,
oh my God.
And it's all handmade. So kind of to think that I'll be doing this, of this complexity and of this high level of quality and everything else. If you were to tell me this 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. You're like, yeah. Maybe when I'm old and gray, I'll get to that point. But I was fortunate enough that technology and VR has sped up the work massively. As a draftsman initially, it means that I can draw in VR, and that means I can do it fairly quickly rather than sculpting in flat form, ZBrush and stuff like that. It's fairly slow comparatively. In VR, it's immersive, it's haptic, and you're there and you got a thing, and you can move it around. So that means that we can do a lot more interesting things faster. And because you can do things faster, it doesn't mean you do less. At least for me, I just tend to do more. So my work tends to be fairly epic as a consequence, because I immerse myself into this world. And there's nothing quite like the joy you feel when you play in VR and you're making this world yourself that didn't exist beforehand. And because of the nature of VR creation is you're cut off from everything else. There is no phone, there is no other things, but you are fully into digital realm. You're basically a cyborg for the time that you're in there. Your eyes are fidelized by digital pixels, and that's literally what you're experiencing. And then to create a world within there that you've made yourself, it's almost like you're a small child and you're not really creating art, you're playing. You're not like working, you're literally playing like a sports person would, like an athlete, but you're playing with creativity and imagination, and you're diving in there and getting these things to be real and visceral. And I tend to work in real scale usually as well in VR, because you can. So you can sketch out something small, blow it up in real scale, and then work at it to kind of get that feeling of hugeness and epicness, which is super cool, but it's also so much fun. And the strange thing is, like, when you create so much in VR, and I've clocked, well, I think I'm like 20,000 hours in VR now, like maybe more. I stopped counting around 17 and a half, and that was like a year and a bit ago, so probably more. When you clock that many hours in VR, it's kind of like you create more in VR because you create more in VR, so it's a self-perpetuating thing. So what happens is, like, you tend towards shamanistic because you cut off from everything else, and it tends to be very primal and almost kind of human, and also childlike, in a kind of good way, as opposed to like naive. And you are creating memories. So while you're in there and creating, because there's no other inputs coming in, you are experiencing the world that you're creating itself. So you feel like a part of that, and it acquires its own kind of like a meta sub-reality that embeds itself in your umwelt of your subconscious. And it kind of like exists there and grows new seeds and new ideas that you get by creating more. So it's kind of like a weird kind of symbiotic relationship you start getting with the work when it is that digital. And it's like an interesting exploration of a human being creating digitally within digital realm, kind of exploring what we would have in Metaverse, as in the proposed like end of Metaverse within 5, 10, 20 years. So we're kind of really exploring those kind of themes and ideas and how that can like move us towards it. So that experience, yeah, it's invaluable. Like, if I thought I was doing that as a small kind of kid when I was drawing comic books when I was 4 or 5, like copying Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and then later on working for them and stuff, like, I wouldn't think that this would happen in my lifetime, let alone when I'm still, like this age and not like super old. So yeah, it feels like a wonderful opportunity and a real privilege to be able to explore this. And the blockchain has just enabled us digital artists to be able to put time steps on our work, not work to be erased, that to exist there forever. It's basically a receipt of creation, time of mint, time of placement, and everything else. That allows us to sell the work, resell the work, monetize in a different way. That means that we can create, for me anyway, we can create more and spend more time doing it and explore some of these things which we wouldn't have explored before. And when you work with clients, it takes an awful lot of time to convince them to do anything new. And usually it has to be a proof of kind of case. And even then it's kind of like quite hard. It's like, oh, should we do this in VR? Like, I haven't done it before. Who's doing it in VR? It's like, well, these guys are doing it. Oh, maybe we'll try it out. Let's try a small project. So to be able to do something like this in this scale and to push that, yeah, that's super cool. I feel really grateful for it.
As a VR artist, what do you think the difference between a traditional digital artist and an NFT digital artist?
In a traditional digital art, and we talk like art as opposed to commercial art, because there's a difference. Commercial art is like, you hook a client and basically you do what the brief is, whether that brief is devising a new character or like a costume for a Marvel film, or whether you're like making a motion graphic design for local government to kind of say a message about putting masks on, something like that. Like it's, it kind of varies. But making like digital art, I think like the monetization was really difficult. Basically the proofing that the work is yours was really difficult. It means that we were putting our work and experimentation online on various platforms for like Insta, Tumblr, Twitter, whatever people's choices are. And you kind of just putting it out there for likes effectively in order to leverage that into other opportunities. So that's kind of how it worked for digital artists for a long time. In general, sometimes I know some people would like exhibit some work, occasional gallery, usually not biggest galleries either. So yeah, that is kind of very kind of restrained. And then with the digital kind of stuff coming in, and with that Beeple sale smashing through the ceiling of art, that opened up doors for everyone. I mean, it broke them apart. Suddenly digital art was valuable. You can put it up like as art itself, as opposed to it's a functional, it's an advert, it's something else. it acquired a life of its own. You weren't just making things so Nike will give you a ring and say like, oh, can you do an advert for us? We really like your personal style. It became like that thing that you're making, that idea, that essence of it, that's important and that's interesting, as opposed to that's a hook for something else. So I think that's one of the biggest differences we are kind of experiencing as artists, like having that kind of almost conceptual freedom to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, as opposed to trying to kind of leverage it into something else, which I think for a lot of people has been the case for a long time.
So where did you get your inspirations for your digital art, and what is most important to you being an artist or designer?
Excellent question. It kind of leads on to what I was saying earlier on. The art I'm making is a digital mythology with characters that are kind of forming themselves within the mythology itself. So when I kind of created the Chorismos, I remember it like today. It was like yesterday, as people say. I made this kind of large head in VR, and because it's too complex, I had to make it in a bunch of different places. So I was pulling each different kind of asset into Blender at a time, and I kind of put everything together in one thing and started applying these materials and everything else. And sometimes when you're making art, you feel like a different person is making it. You feel like it's an out-of-body experience. You're watching yourself making from the side, and you're kind of in that kind of weird, in the flow, in the zone. And I remember like just seeing this kind of head appear in front of me, and I saw like glimpses of this world where that would exist, how it will all kind of work, what things would be with it. And I had like this overall span of vision that kind of appeared, which is kind of something that I've been playing around with different ideas for a long time. So I was like, yeah, okay, cool. So we're making this digital mythology. So I have an overall span of where I'm going with it, but the inspiration for that is like I kind of did a lot of self-inspection and looking at how I create, because I did like a little practice of writing 10 new ideas every week and doing like a short pitch developments, because you never know when you have like a chance to pitch an idea for like a show or a client kind of thing, or incorporate something like visually or something like thematically and stuff like that. So I found it really useful to kind of have around and to kind of train that. And as you kind of do that, you start to think like where your ideas come from and why are you putting those ideas forward? Because when you're doing one or two ideas, it's like, oh, it just came to me. But when you're doing like you sit down and like for the next hour, I'm gonna think of ideas, storylines, how it's gonna work, connect together. You're kind of thinking about these things in a different way, in a kind of more strategic building way. And I'm a big kind of fan of mythologies. I've surrounding by books in my studio, like on the lower shelves, right on hidden elbows. They're just kind of books about mythos, psychology, neuropsychology, vision, historical fiction, science fiction, like all these things. I'm fascinated by worlds that human beings create, like imaginary realities that impact our own experience of life, and then further on in culture, impact our culture itself. I mean, looking back at talk about ancient Greece, like like everyone knows who Homer is, even before The Simpsons. Like the Homeric Odyssey, the Iliad, all these stories impacted. I mean, if you look at the words we use today and the terms, they all kind of seem to come from very same sources as human beings. So these stories impact humanity for a long time. I mean, I grew up like probably mostly from my generation reading, who are geeky and nerdy, reading comic books, watching cartoons, exploring these kind of things. And like now, like these are the biggest stories around us. Things like Marvel is like huge and everything else. When I was little, it was just a comic book some geeks would read, me included, in a corner of a costume. So like these are kind of like the influences that I kind of had as a young child that kind of stayed with me. But also like kind of like directly on this work, things like Robotech, which was such a weird project of combining 3 Japanese anime series into one as a new kind of storytelling thing, very crudely, which I didn't really pick up on as a kid. But did always wonder, like, why are some episodes more coherent than the others? but you kind of seeing this like epic story being told in episodic way with characters with these kind of large robotic creatures which transform, and kind of there's these human beings in there, and everything's kind of like otherworldly, and also a big influence stylistically as well. Transformers the movie, and for all its faults and interesting things, the animation in there of Unicron and Orson Welles was kind of embedded itself in me. And the first time I ever saw it, I saw it in German. I didn't see it in English or anything else. I thought it was a German film because, we had a satellite dish, and we just take a satellite dish and move it around, and we got like Astra 2, the European satellite, and whatever beamed in was what we saw. So yeah, it was. I thought like Thundercats are Italian when I was growing up, for example. So. Because I only ever heard them in Italian. I never got subtitles or anything like that. So you're just watching these characters appear from these other kind of, what I thought other cultures, but other worlds that he's created. And you're just going to, you putting your own story there because you don't really know what they're saying. You're like, doing this, kind of doing that. So within there, you're kind of playing with these things, and also like playing a lot as a kid, playing a lot with like action figures, having like narrative plays. I remember between me and my friends, we would have, we'd literally have like a long running serial that we would kind of do. So every time we met up, we'd have like, okay, with these characters doing this, and they'll run for like months. It's kind of like integration to be like, stop that. Okay, well, now He-Man isn't going to be He-Man. Now he's going to be this other character. We're going to dress him up in this, put a little hat on him, and now he's acting like this, and it's like this kind of weird other world in this technology stuff, and then we're going to take him to the other place. So we were kind of doing this stuff as a small child, kind of preparing myself for today effectively. But also I was reading a lot of other things as well. So like a lot of other books, a lot of fantasy, avid reader since very young age, kind of probably far too much. A lot of cartoons, French La Bande Dessinée, things like Mobius, Jeremiah, Herman, Corto Maltese, obviously Asterix and stuff like that. So this is all stuff I read by the time I was 8. My uncle was like super into this, both of them actually. So yeah, like it was kind of, there's a lot of it around, thousands of comic books everywhere, kind of proper going in. And also we got the VHS. So with VHS, you could record something from TV, and I recorded like every animation. So I would literally kind of like rewind and rewind and rewind, like especially the intros, because they're higher quality animation, the other stuff, and kind of study it and draw it and learn like that, until the tape would run out, basically, because I rewinded too much, and you just got like black and white, and all those little kind of lines started happening, and kind of had to re-record it as well. So I recorded all our family tapes with animation, which my parents weren't that happy, but I learned through it. So that's kind of like the various inspirations kind of came through in those early days, and then they kind of started forming later on within the work, and I think they were kind of crucial to kind of form the work later on. I mean, when you look at my work, the red and white colors, they're the little homages to Robotech that I usually plop in for the Valkyrie designs. Some of the things, especially for that animation from Unicron for Chorismos the movie, that's kind of like looked at with the nose structures and everything else. And then also looking at the mythical kind of qualities of the early civilizations, going from ancient Greece to Mesopotamian, Akkadian civilizations, and how they would treat their mythologies, to kind of look at having basically pre-monotheistic, polytheistic mythological environments of god cities, i.e. every city would have their own set of gods which would go with them when they went to trade or war or whatever. So kind of looking at that kind of aspect of it, looking at the storytelling things about mythology and how we kind of conceive that. And yeah, like one year I did Nano of Remo, that's basically how to write a small novella in a month. And I ended up kind of following that through, and I wrote like 100,000-word novel, which was a great experience to think about narrative structures and how that kind of connects together in a larger sense. So yeah, like all of these kind of things are coming into this. And literally before this project of Chorismos started appearing, I was working on a pilot for a VR series between me and a BBC composer. That
wow.
Well, it kind of got canned with the whole COVID, but it's still on a shelf. It's still warm. But I was looking at it. It's like a 24th century, 25th century far future, looking at technological developments, going deep into the futurist rabbit hole, like a ton of sci-fi reading, hard sci-fi, kind of things from the old school up to like things like three-body problems, stuff like that. So yeah, kind of like really exploring the various things about where humanity is going, where things are going with their digital existence, with simulations within VR, all of that. So my head was full of technological kind of things. I ended up reading like far too many books and also like papers kind of on mythology and digitalism. So, you know, there's lots of academics which kind of publish these. So I usually kind of try to read those for a couple of hours every week. And all of that kind of coalesced into my head to spew out basically what became Chorismos and the world within. And yeah, so like the cues design-wise, they range from the pop culture, from the animations of like 80s, 90s, and then further on as well, to the obviously cinematic things, is like anything to do with sci-fi is kind of like a big thing there, to also that kind of mythical element that's kind of crucial to human experience, which is interesting because many people who work with VR say the same thing about the mythical element. Like it, just that nature of it just makes you create in a way that you're creating that kind of almost mythos, and it's possibly because we're creating it in small space and stuff like that. Maybe that will change as we do like multi-person creation, so you can almost go to more kind of studio level of it. But at this point in time, that's kind of like, it's a self-perpetuating influence as well. So, you know, you're kind of putting these little kind of nuggets of things and little homages here and there and little kind of visions that you're kind of having from it. And then you're kind of teasing these apart and adding other things up on top of it. So yeah, it becomes like a multi-layered storytelling thing. And also the other big thing is looking at the world around us. Like we as artists, we are barometers of our times, no matter how much we try to kind of go beyond or forward from it. So we create in the space that create in a cultural kind of way to create from our experiences and everything else. So all of those things do permeate through my work. Like there's this, like in a Chorismos, the big head, even though it's looking like a lion head, like lion mesh, which is like the oldest sculpture that we have found in an area of Germany, but also like his facial structure reminisces some kind of like a gas mask and everything else, because, you know, pandemic is going on and everything else. So which within every film, there are these aspects which are kind of teasing themselves into it, like reflections of the world that we live in and reflections of the themes that we inevitably kind of seep into our minds that we kind of can't really escape. So yeah, like it's all of these things kind of work to kind of create like a multi-level thematic ends.
Yeah.
So I kind of like to think of it, there's the artist as a storyteller of the world we live in, i.e. this planet and the culture, which is pretty much global now to a degree. And then there's also the anima mundi, the world within, which I'm creating, which is Chorismos, which leaches all of these kind of elements to tendrils from my childhood experiences onwards that are kind of embedded in my brain, and try not to develop them too much, but kind of looking at what actually means as a mythical symbology within my head, so it can kind of come out in that way. And also there's the story of the artist themselves, like me as a human being creating within VR in that kind of environment. And that's also like a different level of creation, because with every work I try to push myself technically and in craft and in art practice, like a good painter trying to perfect the stroke further on. And there's that element in there as well, which is kind of driving forward, is trying to kind of find the kind of perfection of storytelling. So all those three things coalesce together to kind of create it. So yeah, it's complex.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you tell us about like your future plans, let's say like in the next 5 years?
Sure, definitely. I'd love to. As I mentioned, like this overall project that I'm making, the Chorismos, which is the whole kind of like digital world mythology. It's a long-term, it's a long-term project. And initially I conceived it's going to be a weekend, then I had that vision, and it became like 6 months, and then I went to like a year, and now it went to 3, and now I'm looking at 5-year plus. It's going to take me. So
wow.
Yeah. So I have kind of the structure of the whole thing set out, and I know what's going to happen at every point. And I'm working through different epochs. So basically different kind of points of happening. If you kind of think of like millennia of our existence, you know, so we're doing like time jumps between that way. And we're and each kind of thing is a different storytelling glimpse of that world, whether it's animation like the recent one, telling a specific part of that story, or whether it's just a character who's in there who kind of adds to the whole narrative, and things will recur as well. As I think people are starting to find that things are recurring, whether it's thematically or literally the character is happening again, interacting and everything else, and it's more of a story within there. So at the moment, we are just coming towards the, not quite the end, but like 3/4 through the Genesis age, and we're moving into the Dark Age. And then from Dark Age, we're going to move to the Cyber Age, and then we're going to move to the Reclamation Age until we go into the Metaverse itself in the end. So it's going to take a long time to kind of do that. And each part is like adding another step to it. So there's a chronology to it that kind of happens. So just the summer, like I've released a recent like large piece, a 6 minutes piece of a Karakura thesis, which is exploring one aspect of that. And then the next point is going to be something like very cool that we started working with my composer, which I don't want to say too much about this next thing, because we're looking at possible release, just because it may change what it is. Like,
yeah,
so we know what it is like thematically. It is a good chance it may be episodic, but the format is going to take that may kind of change and morph and everything else. So we're probably looking at like releasing that end of January next year, and it's going to run. It's going to be a longer project. It's going to run for a while. So I think it's going to be something that, at this point in time, like it hasn't really been seen in the NFT space at all. But I always kind of try to do things which are unseen when it comes to formats. So where it's like, here's a long form, but like, 8 minutes. Here's something like just, kind of a micro epic series on Nifty Gateway drop, like as opposed to like, oh, here's individual things. No, it's a series. It all makes sense and it kind of combines together to one. It's kind of really trying to play around with the format itself. Always kind of trying to push, I think just my work, try to push the limits of everything I can, and where the limits are, everything is just natural of it. So that'll be the next thing which we're working on. It's going to take us 26 weeks to kind of get that one and complete out at the moment. But I say that may change. We're still in the previous stages of it. And in the meantime, I'm also making like Metaverse spaces, and I've been kind of like learning how to make VRMs, like virtual avatars, metaverses, to translate some of these characters I'm making into Metaverse itself, so people can actually go and grab one and move it around and stuff like that. And that's super exciting. Literally, I'm in the middle of a build-a-thon at the moment with Mona Spaces. So yeah, like that finishes this week. So I've kind of learned how to make VRMs and how to kind of put it through, how to kind of get everything from the pipeline from VR all the way down to kind of like back into blockchain as a VRM. So yeah, that'll be the imminent thing. And then this other kind of larger project in a kind of episodic way, which is going to be for next year. And then on, like then another kind of probably like big thing like Karakura coming in, and then yeah, telling the whole story, telling the mythology through the blockchain basically. So yeah, kind of trying to kind of make something which is meaningful, expansive, epic, and which will effectively outlive me.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm really looking for it.
Thanks.
Thank you guys for watching today's episode. If you like the content, please like, comment, and subscribe our channel as well. Thank you, Ogi, coming to our podcast. And it's really nice to having you today.
Absolute pleasure. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.